Welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast, the show that helps you, well, write better fiction. I'm Shane Miller, urban fantasy author, writing coach, and story geek, and each week I'll be talking to industry experts about the writing craft, publishing, and the business of being an author. Enjoy the show. Hello, Fictioneers, and welcome to episode 4 of the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today I'm chatting to Daniel Willcocks from Activated Authors, all about the author mindset. You'll pick up a ton of tips on how to adopt a positive mindset as an author, so stay tuned for that. But first, it's time for Question of the Week. Because I've been away, I haven't shared answers to the Question of the Week for the past 2 episodes. So the question from Angela Ackerman's episode on the Emotion Thesaurus was, do you prefer writing positive or negative emotions, and why? Christina Adams said, I find writing negative emotions so much easier, but more emotionally draining. Sometimes I'll start a project by writing key conflict scenes, and I'm not sure what that says about me. So I feel that for sure. I love writing the conflict scenes, and negative emotions are so much more fun to write for me personally. But I do agree that it can be emotionally draining if you do a lot of those scenes in one go. The question from the book formatting episode with Julia Scott was, what's one skill you wish you had that you just don't? And AP Beswick said, Facebook ads. You and me both. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so it's time for my update from the writing chair. The last 2 weeks have been about conferences and trade shows for me. So I went to 20 books to 50K the week before last, then went straight on to London Book Fair without much of a break this week. I've got 2 main takeaways from my time away, and those are in-person conferences are hands down the best way to network. So I encourage you, even if you can only afford one conference or trade fair this year, even if you have to save for it, try and go to one. I met people I never would have met otherwise, and I can already see how meeting those people is going to boost my author career in a huge way. My second takeaway was around some of the major advancements in AI technology, specifically ChatGPT-4, that I'm going to have to embrace if I want to stay ahead of the curve. These changes are happening now, not in the future, and author productivity, including mine, is going to skyrocket as a result. I've got nothing else in the way of an update, so if you want early access to episodes, exclusive access to the Fictioneer community on Discord, where you'll get to participate in things like Question of the Week and weekly accountability, you can support the Write Better Fiction podcast on Patreon for just $5 a month. Support the show at patreon.com/Write Better Fiction. When I reach 50 patrons, I'm going to start recording a monthly Q&A episode where I answer your questions directly. Okay, that's about it from me, so let's get into the interview with Dan. Hello, and welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Willcocks. Daniel Willcocks is an international best-selling author and award-winning podcaster of dark fiction. He's an author coach, founder and CEO of Activated Authors, 1/4 of digital story studio Hawk and Cleaver, co-founder of the iTunes-busting podcast The Other Stories, CEO of the horror imprint Devil's Rock Publishing, and the host of the Activated Authors podcast. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Hey, buddy. How's it going? Good to see you.
Yeah, it's all good here. How's things with you?
Yeah, not so bad. Not so bad. Just cracking on and making the things happen.
Yes, a feeling I know well. Okay, so we're going to launch right into it. Start by telling us a bit about you and your writing journey.
Oh, man, I always hate doing these because
Me too.
I started my writing in it was 2014, and there have been so many different stages, so many different sort of milestones along the way that it's hard to know kind of where to round it off or some of the bullet points to hit. But I mean, I guess the simplest way to say it is, as I say, I started writing in 2014 just to play around a bit with writing. I've always been a reader. I wasn't one of those people that was like, it's my lifelong goal to be an author, because I just didn't think it was possible. And then I started experimenting a bit. My son was due to be born on the horizon, which, as most new parents will know, that really gives you a kick in the teeth of one day I'm going to die. What am I going to leave behind? And so I kind of really started thinking about just things that I could do that were not only sort of interesting for me, but would, set a good example for him. And one of the things I settled on was writing a book. So I wrote and I published a book in 2015, discovered self-publishing, Amazon's KDP, all that kind of good stuff. And then the book itself was a little horror novella that went to #1 in the horror charts of that Halloween.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, which was a nice surprise because again, like the whole purpose of putting that book out, it was for me. Like I wanted to have a book on my shelf. And then through that, I met some wonderful people who now have become the core four of Hawk and Cleaver. There's myself, Luke Condor, Ben Errington, Carl Hughes, and it was Matt Butcher at the time, but he has since docked off and done other things. And we formed the other stories with the intention of publishing short fiction to people weekly. That grew into a behemoth that has now surpassed like 10.5 million downloads. And it kind of all sprung off from there. Like just a couple of quick big bullet points, I guess. My journey was I was able to go full time with my writing in 2019. And in 2020, I turned my hand into coaching other authors and helping other authors. And yeah, that's all she wrote.
Nice. And tell everyone how many books you wrote in 2020, please.
So in 2020, I wrote 26 books.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know what to say to that. It always flabbergasts me, but well done.
I mean, there's lots of circumstances that kind of led to it, including obviously a global pandemic, lots of time and a furious hunger at going full time as an author and how I use that. And obviously, so like 26 books. They weren't all 26 full size novels, but you know, there were 26 fairly significant works among pieces. So yeah, it was a year.
Cool. Nice. Well, we're here to chat about the author mindset, but before we get into it, I was wondering what made you so interested in mindset and personal development?
I think really the source of this question goes into personal life. There was some sort of I guess more difficult chapters that were going on in my own personal life around the time that I started getting into writing, and I think there was a sort of serendipitous meeting of events when it came to that, because there's always the more I've kind of deep dived into mindset and productivity and all those kind of things, the more I've realized how many circumstantial events have happened throughout my life that have kind of pushed me in the direction anyway. So a very, very significant memory, a very significant sort of experience for me was I used to do a lot of parkour and a lot of free running, which for people who aren't aware is to kind of like what you see on TV. It's the jumping and the flips off of concrete buildings and stuff. But the real heart of parkour, and something that's rarely ever spoken about, which really frustrates me as someone who practiced it for like a fair few years, is parkour is the efficiency of movement. So it's getting from point A to point B in the most efficient point possible. Ergo, productivity, arguably, because productivity is about simplifying things that you can do and trying to get a maximum impact with the least amount of effort where possible. And I've got a real clear memory of approaching, walking through a car park with a friend in the afternoon, and coming up to, I think we were on the third floor of this car park. There was a small wall, and then there was a gap that would have been about 10 foot across to a wall that was about 4 foot lower, but the drop was about 30 foot. And I remember walking past that and a friend of mine going, "Oh, well, someone's jumped that." And I was like, "Bullshit." Like, no. But there was graffiti on the other side. And so this gap was called the Tallis Gap. It's in Basildon Town Centre if anyone's passing that way and wants to try and find it. And I thought nothing more of it. And I went and I practiced, did my parkour. And then a year later, walked past that exact same gap and was with the same friend, just again, circumstantially, and was like, that gap has shrunk. And obviously we know that it didn't. Yeah. But in my head, it absolutely had. And what had before felt like this sort of gaping chasm, like if you imagine like a movie where it's like zooming in and out and you're like, mm-hmm. had physically shrunk. And I got up on the ledge without like any further thought, and I just jumped it. And so that was a real stepping stone in progression, in understanding the power of your mind and, you know, the things that it can both help you with and push you against. And then when I started going into the writing, I really sort of started to deep dive into understanding the people that do well in their craft. And I, you know, was guided towards the Tim Ferriss podcast. I got really into listening to Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu and reading a lot more books that were all focused around people's journeys, because it very, very quickly became clear to me that the majority of us are built from essentially the same components, like, you know, the same cells, the same sort of rough world. You know, there's a lot of individual components to what life is. But what were the commonalities that united all of these high performers? And they all came down to the same thing, which was, you know, proper rest, proper nutrition, mindset, meditation, all those kind of things that you can hone, you can learn, and this sort of fundamental understanding that as long as you practice and as long as you have the hunger to keep improving, then that is where you will go. And we're not all destined to play in the NBA or to create these incredible art pieces that are going to go global, but we're all capable of becoming better than we currently are.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said about kind of sports and mindset and how it feeds into writing, because a lot of the writers I know who practiced some kind of sport have that discipline mindset. So I used to do martial arts, for example, in a similar kind of situation to you, where there were competitions that I would never dream of entering as like a newbie white belt, but did eventually enter later on.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is that the gap has shrunk. And I think that's a really important thing to mention. So that's cool.
I think just there's a lot of talk in especially the author community, and like it's one of those things that I fully understand from and I'm going to go into like a bit of I guess business speak, but like I fully understand from the customer point of view, but from someone who has studied it for quite a long time now, it really frustrates me because there's a lot of this is the author mindset, this is how an author should think, and all of the principalities of the author mindset are the bedrock of any mindset for any kind of development, anything. Like strip away all of the all the writing, all the reading, strip away anything else that people do, and fundamentally when you're in a room by yourself in the dark, it's you and the voice in your head, and that is the constant universal battle. Like people have come into writing, they've left writing, they've gone into again like sports, out of sports, they've gone into accounting, out of accounting, and the one consistent thing that's always been there is their head. So as long as you've got like somewhat decent baseline of health, it's all your mind. And that's really kind of where a lot of my interest went, was trying to understand what this meant for people across the board in different circumstances, and how you can improve and hone your mindset to become better than, as I say, like it'll all come back to you being better than you were yesterday.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of being better than you were yesterday, when you're coaching authors, what are the most common blocks or issues that you see in terms of mindset?
Separation of church from state. So isolating your writing away from the rest of your personal life. And a lot of this comes from me speaking from a position in which I did the same. Like I compartmentalized my writing as an escape, foregoing the rest of what my life was, which got me into some trouble, both with like sort of my own mental health, but also in sort of relationships and stuff that I had. When I sit down, especially for the first time with authors, or the first sort of few sessions, it comes down to meeting them where they're at and really diagnosing what it is that they're trying to say, because we have this idea in our mind of what the problem is, and like the problem is, oh, I've got this deadline and I don't think I'm gonna meet it, or the problem is I can't write enough words, or I'm getting writer's block. But what you then end up peeling back is that rarely is it ever a problem with your writing or your habit or your routine. Like sometimes that can be the case, but it'll often be either these sort of extreme expectations of yourself that just aren't really justified given your current situation, or I've spoken to people that have had like deaths in the family, or they just come out of like bad breakups, or finances are tight and they're really panicking about stuff, and all of these things, they have to work in tandem in order for you to be, without going so mechanical on it, like functioning effectively. Like I always use a car analogy because I think it's fantastic, but like if your clutch breaks, your car's going to struggle. If your brakes break, your car's going to struggle. If your engine goes, if like all of these core components, if they're not working as they should, the output is then going to struggle. And as I say, sort of most of the time, we blind ourselves to how our personal life affects our writing life. And I can understand why, because again, speaking for myself, like my writing time was my magic time. My writing time was my bubble that couldn't be popped. And it was like, that was, especially at the time, it was very, very busy. There was a lot of sort of like negative stuff going on. It was the one thing I could control.
Yeah.
So anytime I was suddenly like, oh, why is this not working? I would shut out and ignore the possibility that maybe it was because there was other stuff going on. I've since learned and now move forward with that. But yeah, that tends to be one of the biggest things with writers is a lot of the times writers will be influenced by other people. They'll be, looking at how Joanna Penn structures her day, or Sasha, or yourself, or myself, and forget that you're a different person in different circumstances, and that like there is no ideal writer's journey that's universally sort of adhered to across the board. So I then sort of poke with questions and say, how can we make this work for you? Because my ultimate formula for happiness, for productivity, for contentment, is just expectations over reality. So is what you're trying to achieve and where you think you are in line with what your actual baseline reality is? And that's sometimes a hard line to try and get people to reach.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one I think we all struggle with at different points, for sure. And yeah, you made a really good point there about kind of trying to separate writing from life circumstance. So if you're an author who is, you've got chronic pain, or you have a mental health condition, you are not, well, you might be able to on some days, but on the whole, as speaking as someone with a chronic pain condition, you're not going to be able to, do the write every day or write 10,000 words a day, and if you don't, you're like a bad person. I feel like some of the advice that we get given kind of makes you feel like if you're not doing these things, then you can't really call yourself a writer, right?
Yeah, I think there's it's arguably like, so there's a whole mix of things kind of in that question, because people will give you definitives because definitives sell. And oftentimes a guide of some kind, an influence of some kind, will give you these definitives because that's what worked for them, and therefore that is what will work for other people. And because that's worked for them, a lot of people don't do the work in realizing the different situations with different people. And that's kind of one of the foundations of what I built Activated Authors on, was this idea that everyone's different. So some of our members lovingly refer to each other as just like the band of misfits, because we've got people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, that are not your kind of usual people. But they're each one of them is wonderful and like just amazing in their own right. So you've got these people that are touting these kind of rules, but then you've got a baseline of people who realistically, that route's not going to work for everyone, and you need to have your own way, your own base of doing things. But at the same time, by starting with those rules, you can then give yourself some kind of boost in some direction, which is incredibly helpful. So I think it's very, very useful, people giving that advice, but what they don't caveat this with is, but please listen to other people, please try other methods, please understand that this isn't the only way. And then what I've done over the last sort of, I don't know how many years this is now, like coming up to, I'm on 9 years, I think, Jesus Christ, is kind of just taking bits and pieces from the people that I found most workable for myself. So, I'm a big proponent of Joanna Penn and all the stuff that she does. I don't vibe with everything she does, because, she doesn't have children. She lives a very different life, and like her business model is different to mine. I take different lessons from there's a guy called Brett Bartholomew who does a lot of like coaching stuff, who is absolutely fantastic. All these different kind of people who I have taken these bits and pieces from, because you have to understand that like there is no one formula. And I'm sure we're going to keep coming back to this, but I do think it's really, really dangerous advice, because then the worst part is you then get these for want of a better word, I guess, it's zealots that are just then touting and being like, you have to do it this way, this is the only writing advice, listen to this person, go to this person, I learned everything from this person. And then you suddenly almost have like a cult inflated behind people that isn't, it's not entirely beneficial for the people that are involved, and it creates this kind of little bubble that I think is harmful to a long-term view of what an author can do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So you spoke a bit about when you're sitting down with authors, you might poke around, ask a few questions. So how would you recommend, or what are the actionable tips that you can give for authors who want to start developing a positive mindset?
Doing the work to find out where you're at now is always a really, really good start. And that's quite difficult to do, because we often have a warped view of who we are and where we fit. Most of the time, sadly, it is a considerably more negative view on what you're capable of, what you can achieve, what your life is. And so I do a lot of work to try and like prop authors up. And I think it's Peter Jordan that says like, it's amazing how little genuine encouragement people need to be able to, blossom and shine. but there are a number of ways that you can start doing the work on yourself. Very, very early on, I did a lot of experimentation with different things. Again, like coming back to the different experts touting different things. I've tried a lot of things, like your miracle mornings. I've been part of the 5 a.m. club. Like there's a lot of stuff out there that can help you begin that journey. I mean, through Activated Authors, I created what I call the activation author activation matrix, which is essentially a self-diagnostic tool for this exact purpose. So it's essentially a 1 to 10 scale of a bunch of things under different headings that encompass your health, your life, your social life, your work, and then it gives you kind of like a score. And the idea isn't to rate yourself on that score and to grade you on like a curve from like E to A or whatever. It's to show you where you're at and to give you something to aim for, so that you know that, you know, if you did this practice monthly, for example, every month you could fill that in, and the aim is to try and just add 2 points, 5 points onto your total and just slowly build it up. Because it's the same with dieting. If you suddenly, you know, lose a whole load of weight because you've taken very unhealthy methods to do so, you're not going to keep that weight off. Yeah. So taking small steps one at a time is really the optimum way to move forward. I'd kind of try and, if you can, identify some of the bigger things that you can do. So if you are, you know, unfit and you're aware that you should probably exercise more, maybe begin there. If you haven't tried meditation, meditation is a fantastic practice to begin to get you in touch with yourself and just to calm you down in this world that is oh so noisy. You know, if you're not sleeping well, start with sleep, but whatever you do, don't start everything at once, because it's almost impossible to maintain. And again, that's speaking from someone that's done a lot of trial and error. And the other thing to add on to that is, even though you're starting, it's worth, well, two things really. The first is that it takes a few weeks before things start kicking in. And that's often the most difficult part, is the consistency of doing that. Like when I first started getting up at 5 a.m. to do my writing, because it was the only time I had before work, the first 2-3 days were fine because I was excited and it was new. The following 2.5-3 weeks were hell. But before I knew it, I'd been doing it for 6, 7, 8 weeks. And for the next sort of 6 months of my life, like even at weekends, I was getting up at 5 o'clock just because my body got in that rhythm and my body adjusts. And the other thing is that there are always going to be setbacks and there are always going to be slippages. And I think there's an expectation when people start undergoing this work that you're basically on a straight line up. And it's just every day you're going to get that little bit better, that 1%, that 1%, that 1%. But then, you know, you get the flu, or you have like a crap day at work, or a customer's just a dick, and these things happen. And
yes, they do.
Yeah, absolutely, because this is life. Like it's dangerous, I think, to teach people that there's any other thing. And like, while I understand that there are sort of these alpha entrepreneurial types that tell you that, you know, every day is the same and you can do this and it's all in your fucking mind and all that kind of stuff, which, you know, it absolutely is. Like, that's a very specific attitude to have, and it takes a lot of work and resource and circumstance. But yeah, there are going to be setbacks, and then on those days when you have setbacks, allow yourself that grace, that kindness sometimes to slip. Again, just as you know that the next day you're going to get up and be 1% better than you were yesterday, and sometimes that's all you can do.
Yeah, and that's really important, like giving yourself grace if you do if you do like fall off the wagon, so to speak, in your writing habits. I see a lot of authors, particularly on social media, beating themselves up about, oh, I promised myself I was going to do this every day, or I promised myself I was going to hit this word count every day. And then when they don't, they start kind of beating themselves up.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful.
I'll give you an exclusive, which I'm going to be, well, I've tried to put into a book a few times that I've really struggled to do.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect example of this, because essentially around the time, it was around 2017, 2018, I think it was. I was in that mindset of, I was up at the right time. I was meditating, I was running, I was going to work, and, you know, I was a manager in my old day job. And I was pushing through it, and I was doing all the things, and I wouldn't let a day slip. And after about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months of this, I was finishing up at work, and I was the last one in the building. I turn off the lights, I lock the doors, and I leave. And I had literally worked myself into a specific burnout that had me standing in a darkened room with my thumb on the button, just unable to physically move for about 10 minutes. And like, I didn't know, I could see, because it's a glass window and I could see people outside moving, but obviously no one could see me because it was dark inside. And it was a real moment of something's not right here. Like I've followed the advice, I have hustled, I've fucking hustled.
Yeah.
Like I have foregone everything, done all of the practice that people have told me to do, and I smacked like Wile E. Coyote into the side of a building. And kind of a lot of where my mindset teachings and things have come from since then is again trying to prevent people from hitting a similar position, because like being cognitively awake yet paralyzed is absolutely fucking terrifying, and I don't ever want that to happen again.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience in 2020 when I was working a day job and trying a rapid release and doing all those things. And you just fucking hit a wall because you can't, like, it's not sustainable. You can't balance everything. And if you've got a full-time job and you're trying to do all the other things as well, that's tough. So
our
that's,
bodies aren't built for this life. Like
yeah.
a lot of my reading and things over the last sort of half a year or so have been on evolution of man and sort of the noisy economy and attention stolen focus by Johan Hari, I think the name is. But the point being that like we often forget that 15 years ago we didn't really have mobile phones as we know them now. Like we didn't have things buzzing for our attention all the time, and we didn't have our eyes drawn through dopamine hits into phone screens and things.
Yeah.
Like we used to have phones that would ring when someone wanted us, and 90% of the time there were people that we wanted to ring us. Now we're in this position in which we've got all of these things buzzing and pulling us in each direction every single day, like thousands of times per day. Let's be real. And on top of that, we're all telling each other to have a side hustle on top of working full time, on top of having families, because you can have it all, because this select few loud voices out in the ether are telling us it's possible. And it is possible, but is it healthy and is it sustainable? It's especially when, you know, most of us live in a world in which our bottom line of finances is very different to the people who are touting this advice that have like stocks and investments and, you know, unlimited resources out their arseholes. Like, yeah, diatribe over, but it's just a very different world. And I think it's something that we really do have to bear in mind as we go forward and try and like breed new authors and encourage new authors to come to the fore, that like what you're doing is often enough.
Yeah, agreed. And what you're doing is probably more than you think.
Oh, hell
yes. Yeah, definitely. So let's get into a couple of mindset specific issues. I'm going to go right there to the big bad of the writing world, which is imposter syndrome, purely because it's something that I was struggling recently and I've only just got over. And it's something we hear about a lot. So could you explain what imposter syndrome is and how you recommend tackling it?
Well, before I do that, would you mind speaking on your imposter syndrome?
No, I don't mind at all. So ironically, I'm writing, well, I finished the first draft now, but at the time I was writing a mindset book for authors. And I kind of got to the point where I thought, oh, you know, this is shit. Who's going to read this? Who am I to be talking about this? Because obviously mindset books are very personal in a way, I guess, because you have to be personal in a mindset book to kind of exactly. So I was having this like, oh, you know, who am I to be writing this? I think that was at the core of it. And then I started thinking, oh, you know, I'm not, and then it was just spiraling, like I'm not that great a writer, nobody's going to want to read this, what if everybody hates this, you know, the usual fears and doubts that we get with imposter syndrome. And then, and again, I think this differs for everyone, but the way I got over that was I spoke to some author friends about the project and about what I was doing. And a good friend of ours, Sasha Black, basically told me I was being fucking stupid and to get over it in not so many words. She was a lot more helpful than that, obviously, but that was like the core of it. And I think I just needed someone to tell me that it was a worthwhile project and that people would read it, and that with a book like Mindset, everyone's got a different thing to say, and all those messages are put in a slightly different way. So that was enough to get me out of it. But obviously that's not going to work for everyone. You know, tough love doesn't work for everybody.
Absolutely. And every part of that tracks with everything I know about you and Sasha. But yeah, imposter syndrome is it's universal, let's be honest. So to give my answer on this, I'd kind of like pull back to again, like the wider picture of what's going on here, at least as far as I understand it. The majority of us are bred through an education system in which we are told that there are particular paths we must tread, and in which we seek approval for the work that we do. When you step out of that bubble and you become a creative of any kind, you're essentially swimming against the tide, which immediately is going to mentally make you feel like you're going the wrong way and make you question all of the things that you do. It's something, especially when I started moving to nonfiction, it's something that I had a lot at the time, because I got to the point with fiction where, like, I know that my ideal reader for fiction is me. I write for me, and therefore, like, it's easy to put my work out because I understand that not everyone is me, and not everyone's gonna enjoy things in the same way that I do. Non-fiction, you're obviously taking up a bit more of a mantle to teach people. You're putting yourself on a platform in front of the town square and saying, like, I have the answers that you seek.
Yeah.
And you're right, there are people out there who are qualified out the arsehole. They've got like certificates and everything. They've been researching all this stuff for years, and they know all of the stuff. So who am I to do this thing? And I think really for me, it boils down to the fact that everyone has a unique voice. And when I first started writing, again, this is specific to nonfiction for me, but it can absolutely apply to fiction for yourself. No one can say the things that you want to say in the way that you can say them. There are 8 billion people on this world, on this planet. Not all of them can read and write. Of those that can read, a small majority of people are brave enough to write books and to put them out into public hands. And I genuinely believe that everyone has a story they can tell that will reach out to hit someone, because there's always someone ahead of you and there's always someone behind you. And all you can do in any of these books, any of these situations, is speak your particular truth. I think if you're trying to scam people, if you're trying to, bluster your way and pretend that you're something you're not, that's a different issue. And you'll know when that's the case, because you'll know yourself and it will feel wrong. But if you are genuinely trying to provide insight, entertainment, education into the world from a very, very pure place, you can't go wrong. As I say, no one will say what it is that you want to say in the way that you do it. Like, obviously, you're writing a book on mindset. Like, I do a lot of stuff with mindset of activated authors. Like, I've had thoughts about doing sort of a very specific mindset book at one point. Our experiences will be vastly different. We're different people. We've learned different things. I have a very minor education in psychology, which is an E that I got at college. But
same.
Yeah. I hated psychology at college. It was basically just remember dates, and the ultimate truth in college psychology is like, the reason people do this is because of this.
Yeah.
Or it could be this. We don't know. Was what I got from that.
Yeah.
But like, all the reading and all of the studying and things that I've done over the last sort of like decade or so, like, I don't need a certificate to be able to be somewhat assured in how my truth has manifested and how I've learned things along the way. And that's all you can do. And yes, you're gonna find people that don't resonate with your stuff. And I think that's also a part of imposter syndrome, is like the negative criticism. But you've really got to look past that. If you're coming from a genuinely pure place and you have something that you legitimately want to say for like reasons that you can justify for yourself, then who the hell cares about the negative people? Like, because the people that are often negative aren't the people that are also trying to make this world a better place. It's the same as like internet trolls. Like, there's no point arguing with trolls, because you're never going to win, because they're professional at doing what they're doing. Like, go try and focus at the people who, you can help. And annoyingly so, those tend to be the more quiet voices. But when you find them, like, it really kind of validates everything that you do. Now that I have, activated authors, now that I have sort of a core readership with my horror fans, you can kind of weather any storm, because you know that you're reaching the right people.
Yeah, definitely. And you said something interesting about imposter syndrome there. You said if you were trying to scam people, that's a different story. And part of the imposter syndrome myth that I'm writing about in the mindset book is that if you were a scammer or somebody that didn't really care, then you probably wouldn't get it, because you know, you don't care. Like, we want to, I mean, me and you specifically, but also probably 99% of this audience wants to produce the best books we can for our readers. If we didn't want to do that, we wouldn't worry about whether it was good or not, or whether we were the right person to write it or not.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, it's just a sign that shows that you care. And in those moments, you know, go to your core reasons for writing the book. Like I tell people a lot to go back to your why. Whenever like I do any kind of coaching program or speak to authors, it always starts with what are the reasons you're doing this, and again that kind of testifies to that. But then also try and find, you know, accountability partners, people that you can speak to about it to kind of reassure you. Like you say, you had, you know, conversations with Sasha that helped assuage a lot of those doubts. People in activated authors will message each other or drop bits and pieces in there just to kind of tell other people when they're struggling. Like it's understanding that imposter syndrome is not a failure anyway. It's, as you say, it's kind of shows that you care, and it's something that, you know, everyone gets. Like I still do get it with most of what I do, and I don't think that's ever going to go away. It's just, as with a lot of the mindset stuff, once you understand what it is, it's then easier to kind of know the context and to bypass those obstacles.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So another common mindset problem then, kind of related, is comparisonitis. Not something I've actually experienced myself, but what is your understanding of comparisonitis, and how can authors manage it so that it doesn't take over and ruin whatever project they're working on?
Well, yeah, so comparisonitis is essentially this idea that you are comparing everything that you do to other people within the sphere of, well, hopefully within your relevant genre. Because if you're like a romance author comparing yourself to a horror author, you're in very different territory.
Yeah, that's not, don't do that.
No, but it's kind of feeling you're not good enough up against someone else's standards. And again, that's a real difficult problem that people tend to come up against, and it comes back to a lot of the stuff we've spoken about, which is this idea that there is one path to do a thing, and if you're not, so, you know, for example, you have people like Michael Anderle and a lot of the writers that he works with who produce thousands upon thousands of words a day, in working. Like some of them are full-time parents, some of them have all, like, just everyone's sort of situation different. But if you're looking at someone and going, well, a lot of our life is the same, a lot of our life matches up, yet I'm not where they are, even though we started at the same time, and that's not fair. It's a real black hole that can swallow you up when it comes to like jealousy and frustration and anger, and it can taint your own work in the sense of what you're trying to achieve. And so the core to getting past comparisonitis comes back again to understanding that you are only in control of your own circumstances. It's a very sort of stoic view of seeing it, but you can't control how someone else's success will escalate or, you know, de-escalate. You can only control the things that you can therefore control, and a big part of that is, again, going back to why are you writing, and also just continually trying to improve and doing everything you can from your side within your power to get it to where it is that you want to go. Like I've seen authors that have come to this business as a pair, and then one of them will shoot off and like hit wild success. And that could be, you know, virality through TikTok. That can be just a mention on a blog. Like, none of these things you can control. And so in worrying about the things that you can't control, you're sort of doubling the amount of anxiety and pain that you're feeling in yourself. And it's just, it's just very not worth it. So it's understanding, again, this reality expectation formula, bringing yourself back down to your level and going, okay, like they've had success, they've hit whatever, like fantastic, like good for them, and be generally happy for them, because, you know, if they're your friend and they've hit success, that's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what can I do right now to keep moving forward? Because often what's happening isn't a reflection of the quality of your work. It's just circumstantial. It's just environmental. It's just something that has happened to take. They found the right reader. They found the right time, the right moment. We often say with the Other Stories podcast, like, it's very difficult to explain our success with that podcast, because we went from no listeners to 3 months later celebrating 10,000. It just skyrocketed. And there are other podcasts that do similar to what we do, and they've just not hit that success.
Yeah.
And the only things that we could control, and that I would say that we did well, are very good quality audio. We were consistent and we never missed a week. We obviously did the best that we could with writers. We got professional musicians, and like everything that we could, we really sort of did to the best of our ability with what we had at the time. The fact that we hit a rising trend and a vein that kind of helped explode it, and we got into a couple of like lists and things, that was beyond our control. Like there was nothing we can do to manufacture that, but it happened. And so all of it boils down to what is the core package of what you can lend to your work each day. And 99% of the time that's writing more words and growing as an artist.
Yeah, definitely.
It's hard, don't get me wrong.
Like, oh yeah, there's easier ways to make money, people.
Yeah. Oh hell yeah. Yeah. Sam says that a lot on the podcast. Like if you want to make money, become a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So my next question was going to be around like advice that people must do, but we've kind of touched on that a lot. And I think I know what your opinion is on advice that people must follow, because we've kind of covered that. Yeah, very dangerous, right? Yeah. So I'll switch it out. A theme that has come up a lot in this interview, and it comes up a lot when I speak to you in general, is finding your why. So how do people, like, what is finding your why, first of all, and how do people go about finding their why, or how would you recommend they do that?
So your why is the core driving force behind why you're choosing to pursue an author life, in this instance. And there has to be a reason. Like we've just said, there are so many better ways, more reliable ways to make money, to live sort of a satisfying, comfortable life. And you're with your why being the driver, there's a number of different whys that I've kind of come across with authors as I've gone along the way. So, mine in the beginning, I've already said, was I wanted something to show my son. I wanted kind of some kind of legacy that would prove that if you put your heart and soul into something, you could achieve what it is you want to achieve. Some people, it is money, and it is a case of I want to make a quick buck. And don't get me wrong, there are ways to pursue that. Again, there's never a guarantee, but there are methods specifically that you can hack to AI. It's a real point of contention with me at the minute. I've seen like too many adverts in my box about people that are like, I'm an author and I've never written a book, and I'm like, well, I just want to smack you in the face.
Yeah.
So like, it could be money.
I saw one of those the other day on Instagram. I was like, oh.
Was it like a middle-aged blonde woman?
Yeah. I think it might be the same one.
Yeah, she is. Like everything about that advert, I'm like, oh, this has been manufactured and pointed to me so that I will be frustrated, so that I will share it.
Yeah.
So I choose not to share it.
Yeah, me too.
But yes, you've got legacy, you've got money, you've got sort of critical acclaim if you want to get awards and sort of be recognized for the intelligence behind your writing, and go into sort of higher literature and that kind of stuff. It could just simply be that you have a story to tell. Whatever these reasons are, becomes your driving force and keeps you in the chair each day. So at the point in which you realize how tough it can be to get to the chair consistently and to write words and to spend hours grinding away, like it's not like writing is not a glamorous life. Like it really this image that has manufactured itself over the last sort of 200 years of sitting on the porch with your whiskey over sunset and just writing with a pen, absolute bogus. And the worst part is that, like, I saw that as well. I was like,
me too.
On like balconies on my laptop in I don't know, the Bahamas or something.
Yeah.
And it's not like 90% of the time you're sat in a room by yourself staring at a computer with a keyboard. There's nothing glamorous. I've started streaming recently on Twitch in the mornings, just writing sessions, just to like experiment with the platform, just to give me like a point of accountability.
Yeah.
And I see myself in them, and it's just like me in my dressing gown, headphones on, just like resting bitch face, just like tapping the keys for an hour. Yeah. It's not glamorous. Like the end result's beautiful. Like,
it's really not.
Holding a book that's printed, that has a glorious cover, your name on it, that you can kind of hold up and be like, I did it. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is the good bit.
That's less than 1% of the experience.
Yes.
And so unless you have a really good reason for why you want to do it, like this is where people fall at the waypost. Like it's a really romantic thing in society to want to have written a book, but the reality of, again, like doing that work is just lost on people. So yeah, your why is essentially the string that holds you to that goalpost and keeps you moving forward at the times when the days are darkest and things are hard and you want to quit and you just can't be bothered, or you've hit a plot hole that you don't know how to overcome, or you have gotten a bad review, it really is the kind of just angel, I guess, behind you that's pushing you forward.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. And I hadn't planned on this question either, but you just mentioned bad reviews. And obviously that can be hugely damaging to mindset if you're not prepared to deal with the fact that you're going to get bad reviews. So are you one of these people that says never read your reviews, or are you one of these people that say read your reviews, but don't take it too personally? And how should people deal with that in general?
Well, I mean, people deal with it in different ways. How I tend to approach them is like, I'll read them every now and then. I'll comb through. Every now and then I like to look at the one-star reviews, because I like to see, like, it takes a certain type of person to very angrily one-star.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, a lot of the times the people who are one-starring are not your audience,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore not something that I really worry about too much. It's the 2 and the 3 stars where you tend to get the most useful feedback. So quite often in my earlier books, I would get sort of 3 stars, sometimes a 2 star, just to say like the beginnings were really slow, which I'd agree with, to be fair. Like, especially earlier on, I liked to kind of really taper into the story and set the scene and things, and that obviously didn't vibe with the people I was trying to reach. The 4 stars are somewhat useful, because obviously you're getting that praise and it's a nice little ego hit. The 5 stars, again, they're an ego hit. Like, the reviews, most of the time the reviews aren't really for me, unless there's like a mass gathering of negative reviews, which, touch wood, I've never had. That's where you really need to start thinking and looking at what it is they're saying and being pragmatic about it. Like, something that I see a lot with earlier authors particularly, and I get it because, you know, your audiences are smaller, is you'll have a beta reader team of 3 people and one person has said that, like, they don't like the ending, and so you start scrambling to fix it for that one person. Whereas realistically, if you gave that same book to 50 different people, 3 people might not like the ending, but 47 people might. And so as an author, it really helps to start getting accustomed to gathering data, gathering information, and just seeing it from a much more pragmatic lens. And it is hard because, you know, you're emotionally invested in your book. You spend, again, like months in a room by yourself pouring your heart out to a book, and you want nothing more for it than for it to be fantastic and do well. And so one thing that I've started to advise a lot more now that I don't see too much is really incorporating feedback into the writing and the editing process. I've experimented a few times. I've done like Patreon, where I've written chapter by chapter and uploaded the raw chapter unedited to readers, just to be like, here's what's going on, what do you think? At the end of that first draft, I'll kind of potentially tidy up a few bits, and then like I'll give it to readers just to get a bit of extra feedback before it's released or sort of handed on to whoever. But the more used to criticism and feedback, and I would probably argue, like, call it feedback, don't call it criticism. The more used to feedback you can get, and particularly paying attention to valid feedback, which again is a hard line to discern. Just the stronger your writing will be, and the easier you find it. But then if you are someone who does get sort of very waylaid by negative reviews quite easily, just see if you can get someone to filter through them for you and find those. Get someone else to look for those common threads, those different things. I'd argue, like, unless you've got at least 5-10% of your people saying that something is wrong, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess that comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that you can't please everyone, right? So it doesn't matter how to market you write, how tropey you are, how much you meet reader expectation. There will just be readers that don't gel with the book, and that's fine. And some people argue that lower star reviews legitimize the book, because having 1,000 5-star reviews and no negativity is equally as alarming. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, but with me, like, I write urban fantasy. My first series wasn't as tropey, and some people didn't like that. Like, they'd say, oh, it's too emotional for what we're used to. But then other people would say, oh, I actually enjoyed the fact that it was more emotional. So people are always going to like and dislike what you write. I think,
is that a feedback point you're going to change, or is it now your brand?
Yeah, exactly. And then it becomes that decision. Like, are you the author who includes more emotion than usual? I think can't remember which author it was, but there was a thriller author that always, their tagline was like thrillers with heart or something.
Nice. Yeah.
And that can work too if you make it part of your brand, for sure. So
well, the other side of that as well is that there are multiple cogs in the publishing machine that eventually have to align to have maximum impact. So with, again, the stuff I do with activated authors, with the Zero to Author mastermind coaching program I'll be running, a lot of what I'll be teaching in that is looking at it's about optimizing for success. You can't promise success, but you can optimize and do as many things right as possible to give yourself a greater chance for that to work. So from the very beginning, looking into the market research of your book, how do you, like, are you specific, are you deliberate about what you want to achieve with that book? And again, like, I'll use a recent example of mine, a book called The Nowhere Line, which is currently with readers at the minute, which I'm looking to try and get a small press behind it because I want to put myself forward for some more awards and things. But I was very specific about that book. That book is much more literary than anything that I published. It's very heavily purple. It's quite abstract. It's very it's not your straightforward sort of pulp piece at all. But I knew that going in because I knew what it was I wanted to achieve at the end of it. And then doing that research before you've then written the book, once you've done the book, when it comes to like covers, when it comes to creating a marketing strategy, when it comes to all that kind of stuff, and if I do go into if I do end up independently publishing this, again, it's going to affect how I write my blurb, how I display my promos and everything else, because I have to speak to what that book is in a psychological language of marketing. And so sometimes when you get those negative reviews, as I've kind of mentioned a few of mine before, it's not that your book is wrong, it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's potentially misplaced. Because I've had real sort of dilemmas with some of my books where it's like, are they post-apocalyptic, are they horror? Because they are two different audiences. And I tried it in one and been like, oh, that's not quite getting the reaction I wanted, so I've switched it and changed my marketing. I've paid hundreds to change a cover because it didn't quite fit the tropes, and then it hits and it does well and people go into it. So sometimes it's not even the book, it's just how you sell it and how you market it.
Yeah, that's a valid point. And I know we're slightly off topic, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like if you write horror today, that doesn't mean you have to write horror forever. That's another thing, like a mindset trap, I think, that people fall into, that once they're in a niche, they're stuck in that niche, and that's just not true.
Yeah, well, that's why in my intro you read it says best-selling author of dark fiction, because I've written horror, I've written post-apoc, I've written a bit of sci-fi, I've got a bit of urban fantasy in there. Most of what I tend to write has darker themes and plays a bit more with monsters and that kind of stuff. So like I very specifically say dark fiction as opposed to horror.
Yeah, great marketing tactic. Then you can pretty much do what you want as long as somebody dies, right? So that's good. Awesome. Okay, if you're comfortable to, can you talk about a mindset issue that you've overcome in your writing life and how you went about doing that?
Oh man, well, I think it speaks back a little bit to what we were saying before, in that it's a never-ending game, is mindset, and rather than speak on one that I've overcome, I'll speak to one that I'm going through at the minute, because it's very sort of like
awesome,
fresh for me. But like, well,
not awesome. I don't want you to be going through mindset stuff.
No, I get you. But like, so something again that I've tried to breed into the culture of activated authors, and one thing that seems to be the reason that I resonate with people when I speak on podcasts and kind of go in and do talks and stuff, is like I really try to be honest and transparent with my own journey and all the different things that I'm going through as much as I can without kind of putting other people in shit and things. So I've been struggling a lot with physical chronic conditions, like hand pain, finger pain, arm pain. Like it's kind of spreading, and in the last sort of couple of days have been diagnosed with depression. Right. And so one of the things that I've really kind of like put forward to try and help this situation as much as possible is like I know what it is to suffer alone, and so I really make a point of, particularly the people that are in my life that I rely on, I lean on, like I've been very vocal about reaching out and being just honest and again transparent with trying to let the people know that can help me. And even in as much as phoning a doctor and kind of explaining the situation and getting the diagnosis and now having additional medication to try and like wean me off of some of these issues, like it's one of those that it's very, very difficult to process and go through, but at the same time, like I'm like, I think because of a lot of the mindset work I have done, it basically has pushed me into a position in which I've pushed much, much further with depression without realizing it's depression, because I've had a lot of coping strategies. But you know, everyone kind of has their limit, and it's now in that position where, you know, I'm proud of the fact that I've spoken to people, and a lot of the time that's most of what it is taken to get out of, you know, mindset bunkers, is seeing people, it's paying attention to the sort of fundamentals of just health. So like your physical health, like you can want to do all the things in the world, but if your body's not working for you, that's no use. You can want to do all the things in the world, but if your mind isn't working, like that's out the window. But then what are some of the functions that help restore and recover physical health, mental health, all that kind of things? It's sleep, it's community, it's exercise, it's nutrition, it's water, it's self-care, it's rest. It's all these kind of pillars that combine to then try and give you that stronger foundation so that you can keep moving forward. And it's always come back, like no matter what the problem has been, it's always come back to trying to get because obviously like those are the things that get most affected when things go wrong, is like you start getting worried about stuff, so you sleep less. Because you sleep less, it's easier to just reach for like a snack. You probably drink less water because it's less consciously on your mind. You stop exercising because you don't have the time. You then get more lethargic because you haven't been sleeping and you haven't been exercising, and your body hasn't got the right fuel that it needs. So it's looking at what those pillars are and what you're kind of lacking, and then again coming back in full circle to everything we've spoken about is how can you get 1% better today than you were yesterday? Because ultimately that's all you can do is push forward.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that and being so open. And I was in a similar position to you. So I think around about the same time you had your chronic pain issues, I was suffering from what the doctors have termed radiculopathy, which is a ridiculous name for a chronic pain condition. It does, doesn't it? But it affects my radial nerve, and if I have a flare up, it, you know, can put me out of action for weeks to a month. And chronic pain is really hard to deal with. Like, it's wearing on the body, it's wearing on the mind. And I found myself in a place where I was diagnosed with depression. I had to go on antidepressants and do all the things. And yeah, it's really the key thing you said there, which I think is really hard for people to do, and it sounds really easy when you're coming out of it, but do speak to someone, whether that's a family member, whether it's a doctor, whether it's, you know, your writing community, if you feel comfortable enough to do so. Because once you've spoken about these things, it's much easier to process them. Whereas if you're bottling all that up, it's just not very healthy.
Yeah, and one thing that really caught me off guard that when I spoke to the doctor the other day was that he kind of said that I would classify as a high functioning depression.
Yeah.
In the sense of I'm a silent sufferer. So like there's obviously lots of people who are on the scale of depression who, you know, physically self-harm, have all these like really sort of outwardly obvious tics and traits and things. But there's a lot of people in this similar situation, like you say, that don't tend to talk. And it's one of the reasons that in Activated Authors, we have in our Slack community, the Vent and Fury channel, because, you know, it's a safe space where, like, you know, I monitor it and regulate it, but it's a safe space that if people are having a shitty day, they can just put something in there without judgment. Like we've had people sort of paragraphs of stuff from, you know, health issues and family issues and money issues and all the things. And it just seems to be a very, very useful space where obviously people can come on, and you can't fix something over the internet. You can't say, like, you can't type away someone's problems, but just knowing that other people are there and that they're listening and that, you know, you've got their support behind you, it's massive. You can't match that.
Yeah, definitely. And it also helps to know that other people have experienced similar things. I think you get into a headspace where you think, oh, is it just me that feels like this? Like, it feels very isolating and alone if you allow it to. But yeah, do reach out to people. Obviously, we're not medical professionals, disclaimer, but yeah, I definitely agree that you should reach out to someone, and if you do feel like you need to speak to a doctor, then there's no shame or harm in doing so.
It's universal across the board as well. Like all of my earliest, like I genuinely put so much attribution to the fact that I began and kept going to Luke Condor, who I wrote a lot of my books with. And we're still friends today and meet up and run the podcast and things together. Like, had it not been for him and having someone like, because me and him are very, very similar minded, we've got very, very similar lives. Like, he was in the business for a little bit longer than I was at the time, but like there was so much to bounce back off of to spur each other on that it was a really good fit. And like, it's just been very good to have that accountability partner over the years.
Yeah, that definitely helps. Okay, to switch the tone ever so slightly, this is the Write Better Fiction podcast, and this is my favorite question. I ask all my guests this question. So, Daniel Willcocks, why do you write fiction?
To understand, I guess, is the simplest way of putting it. It feeds a lot into, I get asked why I write horror a lot, and it comes down to the same thing. Like, writing for me it's an exploration of life, of situations, of anything that I'm going through, that I'm feeling, that I wonder what other people are feeling, and it's a playground to just sort of understand life. So especially when it comes to horror, a lot of the things that I write about are stuff that I'd never want to happen, or I'd never imagine facing those. But at the same time, it's fascinating from my side to really try and there's almost like Tim Ferriss calls it fear setting, is like this anticipatory feeling of like, well, if I write about like granny dying or like the dog getting kicked, then I'll be prepared for if that happens to myself. And obviously you hope it never does. But yeah, I just think like the world's a magical place. It's so full of life and wonder and laughter and love and pain and all the different things. And like there's also couple that with the fact that I just love experimenting with language. Like my background, like I've done poetry, I've done spoken word poetry, like I've kind of written on and off bits and pieces for years, and I really love just the fact that you can paint a picture with language, but not only that, but make people feel something with ink on paper. Like there's a really glorious, I can't remember, I think it's in his On Writing with Stephen King, where he talks about like writing as time travel.
Yeah.
Like the idea that you can sit there and you can type and know that for the rest of time, someone could pick up your book and be transported to the thing that you were doing then. It's just crazy. So yeah, it's wonderful. And obviously there's the whole connecting with readers. Like I love it when you get a reader reach out and they're just like, oh, this book helps alleviate some pain. Or we've got a woman that follows everything that we do at Hawk and Cleaver, who is she has some real serious health problems, but she's a diehard fan because she just loves the fact that we're constantly putting out stuff to give her some respite from her suffering. So it's a whole amalgamation of things. Like it's that thing of, now that I've really like invested in the bug, and I'm coming up to like a decade of solid writing and things, I don't know that I could ever stop.
Yeah, I feel the same way for sure. I mean, I haven't been at it as long as you, but definitely I don't think I could stop now. Mm-hmm. Just for that, when you do get a reader that says, oh, this really helped me with this, or this gave me the escape I needed from XYZ, that's priceless for me. Yeah.
Your massive monster
yeah
lashing up the main character really brought me out of my worries and pain.
Just so much escape, just made me feel hopeful. Life's not that bad. Yeah, no, but seriously, I feel the same way for sure. So to close up then, can you tell everyone about where they can find out more about you and everything you do?
Of course. So there are two main places for me. One of them you would have heard a lot is the Activated Authors. So activatedauthors.com.
I'm familiar with Activated Authors, Dan.
Yes, you're one of us now. And the other one is at danielwillcocks.com, where you'll find a lot more about my fiction and all of my kind of writing stuff. And that's Willcocks, which is WILLCOCKS.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the show, Dan. That was great.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Dan and picked up a ton of actionable tips on how to develop a positive author mindset. Join me next week when I'll be chatting to Charlotte Murphy, author of the Eververse universe, all about how to write fantasy. Have a great writing week. Thanks for listening to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Remember to hit subscribe on your favourite podcatcher and leave a review, and we'll chat again next time.